Go ahead.
Hi. During your speech, you made a lot of references to Jewish people, as well as certain people in your audience, not Jewish people in general, but certain people, especially in your audience, to Nazis. Now, that is extremely offensive when certain people are German, and they're also extremely offensive to people who've actually suffered under Nazi rule.
I don't respect that anymore. I really don't. I don't like and I don't respect the crocodile tears the crocodile tears. No. I'm sorry, folks. Allow me to finish, and allow me to finish. Listen, sir, allow me to finish. Sir, I don't like to play before an audience the Holocaust card. But since now I feel compelled to. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother, please shut up. My late father was in Auschwitz. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on my father's side.
The Jews did not take arms against the
My late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. Both of my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it's precisely and exactly because of the lessons my parents taught me and my two siblings that I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture, the brutalization, the demolition of homes that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. So I refuse any longer to be intimidated or browbeaten by the tears. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians, not for what's inside.
Would you condemn Hamas for what they did?
My view is as follows. Number one, as far as the evidence shows now, atrocities occurred on October 7th. The magnitude of the atrocities and the types of atrocities, for example, were children beheaded, were women raped. That remains, so far as I can tell from the evidence, an open question. However, that there were atrocities that occurred, my answer is yes. That's a factual question. And then there is the legal question. As a matter of law, it seems unquestionable that the people who perpetrated these atrocities would be prosecuted and convicted in a court of law. However, I would say on the legal question, I should think that there would be some mercy shown because those who carried out the atrocities were concentration camp inmates. Number three, which I think is the one that concerns you the most, is the moral question. My basic precept is that there, but for the grace of God, go I. That is to say, I'm very reluctant to condemn people who are in a position or in a condition such that were I in that position or condition, I'm not sure what I would do. Now, the 1,500 young men who burst the gates of Gaza, they were born into a concentration camp. They lived for 2 decades in a concentration camp. They had no past, they had no present, they had no future, they had no jobs. Half of them, according to humanitarian organizations, suffered from what's called severe food insecurity. And then on top of that, as I'm sure you know, Pierce, because you keep up with the news, periodically Israel goes into Gaza and it mows the lawn. And you know what mows the lawn means. It means a high-tech massacre in Gaza. In 2008-9, Operation Cast Lead. 2012, Operation Pillar of Defense. 2014, Operation Protective Edge. And in each of these high-tech massacres visited on the people of Gaza, in some cases hundreds, in some cases thousands of Palestinians are killed. You ask me why I won't condemn them. Because those young men were born into a concentration camp. They were born into among the most dense populated places on God's earth. Half of the population of Gaza is children. 70% are refugees who were expelled from Israel in 1948 and their descendants. 70% of Gaza's youth have no jobs, no future, no nothing.
Okay.
And the people
Professor
of
Finkelstein.
Gaza have the right to hate the people who destroy their lives.
Do you honestly think that a leader of Israel is in a position after the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust to say, you know what we should do in reaction to this is free the Palestinians, whatever that looks like. This is never going to happen, right?
Correct.
And I'm interested in living in the real world, as I think you are. If you care about the lives of Palestinians and Israelis and everybody else, that means there has to be some kind of way of resolving this that is based in reality. And in reality, whatever way you look at it, you've got two tribes that absolutely hate each other with good reason for both sides to hate each other because there's been atrocity against both sides throughout history. You may argue about who's responsible and blah, blah, blah. blah. Reality on the ground is this is where we are. So my question is, how should Israel have reacted in that situation in the real world?
What in the real world should the Palestinians have done if they tried negotiations, they gestured to supporting either a two-state settlement, here I'm referring to Hamas, or what they called a hudna, a long-term ceasefire, when in March, beginning March 30th, 2018, they tried, not least because of my encouragement, they tried nonviolent civil resistance. And what was the Israeli response? We know exactly. There's a 250-page, single-spaced UN report describing the response. Israel took its best snipers, lined them up along the perimeter fence, and while there was this festive, to describe, to use the word of the UN report, atmosphere among the Palestinians, there was music, there was dancing, there was song. The snipers, I'm quoting the report, intentionally targeted children, medics, journalists, disabled people. They described double amputees 300 meters from the perimeter fence that Israel shot. When they didn't kill them, they targeted them from the kneecap down to inflict, to use the technical term, life-changing injuries, which for the layperson translates as paralyze them. One Israeli sniper boasted to Haaretz newspaper, Israel's most serious newspaper, he shot 42 kneecaps in one day, 42 children and adults paralyzed for life. And so when all the options of diplomacy, nonviolent civil resistance, when they've been exhausted, what were they supposed to do?
You know how many citizens, civilians died in the October 7th assault?
Yes, but that's not...
You know that there are lots of allegations of rape. I don't know how persuaded you are of those. They did find bodies without heads.
There were no beheadings
Islamic,
of infants.
there were some beheadings, apparently.
The Israelis didn't even claim that in the document they submitted before the ICJ. Go read what your government submitted. It never mentioned beheadings.
Well, as far as I know, there were some people who were beheaded. But
we could bring it up right now.
You also deny that there were rapes there.
I didn't deny. I said I've not seen convincing evidence that confirms it. I've said that from day one, and I'll say it today 4.5 months later.
Do you know that they killed 800 or 900 civilians in their assault?
Absolutely. Yes. That seems to me indisputable.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm
Yes.
glad that you're
I've said
something.
that. I've said that from day one.
Well, to be clear, you haven't. You did a debate. I don't remember the talk show, but you seem to imply that there was a lot of crossfire and that it might have been the IDF that killed a lot of...
I said that there is no question, because the names were published in Haaretz, there is no question that roughly of the 1,200 people killed, 800 of them were civilians. 850, fine. So I never said that, but then I said, no, we don't know exactly how they were killed. But 850 civilians killed? No question there.
There's a lot of tricky language being employed here. Do you think of the 850...
It's called attaching value to words and not talking like a motor mouth. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, 1,000 humanitarian and economic organizations have all reached the same conclusion. It's very simple. The main cause of the disaster in Gaza is Israel's illegal blockade of that parcel of land. Full stop.
That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's false.
Who's wrong? Who's wrong? UNCTAD is
That's
wrong.
false.
The World Bank is wrong.
Blockade,
The International Monetary Fund is wrong. They're all wrong.
Yes.
Are they all anti-Semitic? Is that what's going on?
I didn't say that. They're wrong. I happen to know
So
more
why
about
are
the
they all
law
wrong?
than any of them. Because the blockade was completely lawful. It was designed to prevent the importation and then the use of rockets against Israel. It's perfectly lawful for a country to engage in a blockade. That is, you're not letting me finish. You can't have a double. Look, Israel is exposed to a double standard, but we're not letting you impose a double standard on me. No, I'm going to finish my statement, and you're not going to interrupt me. So understand me. The military occupation was lawful. The blockade was lawful. Every country has the right to defend itself from rockets, from terror tunnels, from people coming over the border, murdering and kidnapping people. Those are all lawful. I'm telling you that as an expert in international law and the law of war. If you want to dispute me, get an expert who knows something about international law. Not a polemicist like
Professor Dershowitz, Professor Dershowitz, just as a matter of fact, I teach the laws of war. I've been teaching it for the last 5 years. To my understanding,
you're biased.
Professor Dershowitz, let's agree. I'm completely ignorant. Let's take that as a point of departure. How does it come to be that every humanitarian and political body in the world has declared that the blockade of Gaza constitutes collective punishment and therefore is a violation, a breach of international law, a war crime under international law? How did that come to pass?
They're wrong.
How is it that
First of all, you're wrong.
They're all wrong.
No, you're not.
You're
not right.
Except
You're
Alan
not right.
Dershowitz.
No.
Except
You're wrong. You're wrong in describing.
Professor Dershowitz.
You're wrong in describing every group. There are many groups.
Professor Dershowitz, name me one legal international legal body or human rights organization. Name me one. I'll take the pause. Name me one that says the blockade of Gaza is not collective punishment. Name me one.
The Lawfare Project in the United States.
The Lawfare Project. I said name me one international legal or political body.
It is.
One.
It is.
Everybody's listening now. Piers Morgan has a very large audience. Name me one. Name me one international or legal or political body that says the blockade of Gaza is legal. Name me one.
It is legal, and every organization that I have been associated with, the Lawfare Project, the project run by a woman named Leitner, and the International Project, have all concluded that the blockade
I
is
said
legal.
one
Also,
legal or
the Israeli
political
Supreme...
body.
Professor Morris,
Yes.
you just said, I would condemn
And I
any
have
time
condemned.
Israel deliberately attacks civilians.
Yes.
Okay? The problem, Professor Morris, is over and over again, you claim in the face of overwhelming evidence that they didn't attack civilians.
That's not true. I've said
Really?
Israel has attacked civilians.
Professor
In
Morris-
Libya, Israel attacked
Right,
civilians.
Professor
And I've written
Morris.
extensively
Okay,
about
I
it.
know that.
In Kafr Qasim, they killed
Yes.
civilians. And I've written
And now
that.
let's.
So you're just eliminating,
Okay.
you're selecting.
Okay.
As Stephen says, you cherry pick.
If I were you,
You cherry pick.
Let's fast forward when you were an adult. What did you say about the 1982 Lebanon War?
What did I say?
You don't remember? Okay. Allow me.
Uh-oh.
Okay. You said that you are not a person of double standards, unlike people like Mouin. You hold high a single standard, and you condemn deliberate Israeli attacks on
When they
civilians.
occurred, yeah.
And I would say that's true for the period up till 1967, and I think it's accurate, your account of the First Intifada. There, it seems to me you were in conformity with most mainstream accounts. And the case of the First Intifada, you also used, surprisingly, you used Arab human rights sources like Al-Haq, which I think Mouin worked for during the First Intifada. That's true. But then something very strange happens. So let's illustrate it. So this is what you have to say about Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. You said Israel was reluctant to harm civilians, sought to avoid casualties on both sides, and took care not to harm Lebanese and Palestinian civilians. You then went on to acknowledge the massive use of IDF firepower against civilians during the siege of Beirut, which traumatized Israeli society. Morris quickly enters the caveat that Israel, quote, tried to pinpoint military targets, but inevitably many civilians were hit. That's your description of the Lebanon War. As I say, that's when I first got involved in the conflict. I am a voracious reader. I read everything on the Lebanon War. I would say there's not a single account of the Lebanon War in which the estimates are between 15 and 20,000 Palestinian and Lebanese were killed, overwhelmingly civilians. The biggest bloodletting until the current Gaza genocide. Biggest bloodletting. I would say I can't think of a single mainstream account that remotely approximates what you just said. So, leaving aside, I can name the books, voluminous, huge volumes. I'll just take one example. Now, you will remember, because I think you served in Lebanon in 82, am I correct on that? Yeah. So you will remember that Dov Yarmia kept a war diary. So, with your permission, allow me to describe what he wrote during his diary. So, he writes, the war machine of the IDF is galloping and trampling over the conquered territory, demonstrating a total insensitivity to the fate of the Arabs who are found in its path. A PLO-run hospital suffered a direct hit. Thousands of refugees are returning to the city. When they arrive at their homes, many of which have been destroyed or damaged, you hear their cries of pain and their howls over the deaths of their loved ones. The air is permeated with the smell of corpses, destruction and death are continuing. Does that sound like your description of the Lebanon War?
Forget my description.
Forget it?
The point you're
Words
making...
are in print. We can't just
let
forget
me
them.
just finish my sentence. The point you're making, which you somehow forget, is that there are Israelis who strongly criticize their own side and describe how Israelis are doing things which they regard as immoral. You don't find that on the Arab side.
I'm talking about
don't
you,
find that.
Mr. Morris. I'm not talking about Dev Yarmia. I'm talking about you, the historian. How did you depict the Lebanon War?
Because I believe that the Israeli military tried to avoid committing a civilian casualty.
So all the accounts by Robert Fisk and Pity the Nation.
Fisk is
anti-Zionist
journalist.
I know.
Has always been.
Right. So that's why you can say with such confidence that you don't condemn deliberate Israeli attacks on civilians. Because there weren't any.
No, I didn't say there weren't any.
Yeah, you didn't?
You agreed that I have condemned Israeli attacks on civilians.
I never quarrel with facts. Your description of the 1982 war is so shocking, it makes my innards writhe. And then your description of the Second Intifada, your description of defensive shield,
when Arab suicide bombers were destroying Jews in masses in buses and in restaurants. That's the Second Intifada. Do you remember that? Suicide bombers in Jerusalem's buses and restaurants.
I am completely aware of that. But if you forgot the numbers,
I don't forget
it was 3-1.
They killed mostly armed Palestinian gunmen.
That's what you say in your book. But that's not what Amnesty International said. That's not what Human Rights Watch said.
I don't remember what they said.
I do. Benny Morris now says, we don't know whether Israel has nuclear weapons. Well, that's a very odd thing for him to say, because Benny Morris has been explicitly blackmailing the West since 2008, saying, if you don't, meaning the United States, if the U.S. doesn't join in an attack on Iran, we, meaning Israel, have no alternative except to use non-conventional, that is to say, nuclear weapons. So, if I can quote him now, it is doubtful that its conventional capabilities will be sufficient to destroy the Iranian nuclear project. then non-conventional weaponry will have to be used to stymie the project. And many innocent Iranians will die. But the Iranians will have brought this upon themselves by bringing to power and leaving in power a leadership that will have forced Israelis to do what was necessary in order to survive. So Benny Morris, who doesn't know whether Israel possesses nuclear weapons, nonetheless says Israel will have to use non-conventional weapons. And he says many Iranians will have to die, maybe millions, maybe tens of millions, but they deserved it because well, that's what he said. Mr. Morris, you can laugh till kingdom come, but I'm quoting your words. But he said that's okay because they voted for the regime.
No, this is absurd. This is absurd. I said Israel. And let me respond. Hang
on. Norman, I think Benny Morris shouldn't be able to respond to your direct charge there because you accused him of laughing at it.
I didn't charge. I quoted.
No, you said he was laughing about it. So let me get to Benny Morris to explain what he's doing.
As is your want, you didn't quote me properly. What I said was that if Israel is unable with conventional weapons to destroy the Iranian project, and if the Americans don't do it in conjunction with Israel or by themselves, Israel will be forced to use non-conventional weapons and attack the nuclear installations. Not kill millions of Iranians. No. You said millions of Iranians. I've never said anything. I have never said anything about millions of Iranians. This is pure nonsense. This is pure. Norman, you are lying. You are lying.
What do you think happens if you drop?
You are lying.
Professor Morris, what do you think happens if you drop nuclear weapons on Iran? What do you think happens?
No, not on Iran. Not on Iran. Norman, you are misquoting.
I'm quoting you, Professor Morris. For you to say we can't trust Iran after Israel's record on nuclear weapons, as even you so shamefacedly and shamelessly say, I don't know if Israel has nuclear weapons. You really don't? You advocate Israel's use of them in the event that the U.S. doesn't join the attack on Iran, but then you don't know if Israel has nuclear weapons. You're such a shameless liar, which is a sad fact. I spent many a week reading your books. I spent many a month reading your books. And to see how you have degenerated into a state propagandist and a bold-faced liar, very sad.
Absurd,
very sad. Every time they target a kid, I'm sure they believe it's Hamas. When they killed the 4 kids in the...
They believe?
I know they believe it. Even though they were diminutive size. Even though they were diminutive...
You don't see the size.
No, they saw it.
Let's see the size.
Oh, I know what he's quoting from. You've lied about this particular instance in the past. Those kids weren't just on the beaches as Office stated in articles. Those kids were literally coming out of a previously identified Hamas compound that they have operated from. They literally...
Mr. Borelli, with all due respect, you're such a fantastic moron. It's terrifying. That wharf was filled with journalists. There were tens, scores of journalists. That was an old fisherman's shack. What are you talking about? It's so painful. It's so painful to listen to this idiocy.
And to be clear, on the other side, you're implying that a strike was okayed on the Israeli side when they said, we're just going to kill 4 Palestinian children today for no reason.
Do you believe that?
Do you believe that? Do you believe that? Do you believe they tell journalists? Do you think that they will kill 4 children?
Here we go.
I will never answer that.
I will answer the question.
Pilots will out
I will even answer
children.
And it was because that was a strike. That was a drone strike. That was a proof all the way up the chain that we're going to kill children today. We're going to kill Palestinian children.
You want me to answer, or do you want your motor mouth to go? Okay, answer. In 2018, there was the Great March of Return in Gaza. By all reckonings of human rights organizations and journalists who were there, it was overwhelmingly nonviolent.
Organized by the Hamas.
Whoever organized it.
Organized by Satan. Let's start with
Hamas.
Okay, by Satan. Yeah. I agree. Let's go for the big one. The big Megillah. It's Satan. Okay? Overwhelmingly nonviolent. Resembled at the beginning the first Intifada. Represent the first. Okay. Not bombs. But
they tried to make holes in the fence. Okay. Obviously.
Let's continue. So.
But I'm not sure Israel behaved morally in that respect.
Okay.
No.
Wait.
I'm willing to grant you.
Please.
Allow
me to.
You don't have to pursue
allow me to finish.
I don't know anything about this. I'd like to.
Okay. As you know, along the Gaza perimeter, there was Israel's best trained snipers, correct?
I don't know best trained. They were snipers.
Fine.
Snipers.
Okay. All right? Because, hey, laugh. It's hilarious. The story's so funny.
You're lying about the Great March of Return had aspects of violence to it. According even the UN says it themselves. But you only select what the UN says that you like.
See, the problem, Mr. Morelli, is you don't know the English language.
I can read from the UN website itself. In regards to the Great March of Return, they said, while the vast majority of protesters acted in a peaceful manner, during most protests, dozens have approached the fence attempting to damage it, burning fires, throwing stones, and Molotov cocktails towards Israeli forces, applying incendiary kites and balloons into Israeli territory. The latter resulted in extensive damage to agricultural land and nature reserves inside Israel and risked the lives of Israeli civilians. Some instances of shooting and throwing of explosives also
Talk fast. People think that you're coherent.
I'm just reading from the UN.
Yeah, but you see,
you like them sometimes, only when they agree with you.
You got the months wrong. We're talking about the beginning in March 30th, 2018.
You just described that March as mostly peaceful.
Okay, allow me to finish. So there were the snipers. Now you find it so far-fetched. Israelis purposely, deliberately targeting civilians? That's such a far-fetched far-fetched idea. An overwhelmingly non-violent march. What did the international investigation...
It was a campaign
whatever you want to call it.
For months.
Whatever you want to call it.
For months.
Yeah. What did the UN investigation find?
Well, he just read it.
I read the report. I don't read things off of those machines. I read the report. What did it find? Brace yourself. You thought it was so funny, the idea of IDF targeting civilians. It found, go look this up on your machine.
I already know what you're going to say. You're going to say it found that only one or two of them were justified killings.
Targeted journalists, targeted medics, and here's the funniest one of all. It's so hilarious. They targeted disabled people who were 300 meters away from the fence and just standing by trees.
This is true.
My criticism of Norman Finkelstein is slightly more prosaic. I have no problem at all with writers being provocative. It's what I am paid to do. But you're not very good at it. You're a hack writer. You made a factual error.
You're certainly entitled to your opinion. I don't know of any expertise. I don't know of any expertise you have in the topic.
You've understated by a large number the number of Holocaust survivors.
That's the last question.
Okay,
very briefly.
I would like to answer
very
that.
briefly, please.
I don't claim at all to be an authority in the Nazi Holocaust. The book The Holocaust Industry is not about the Nazi Holocaust. It's a book about how the Holocaust has been rendered in popular opinion and in so-called scholarship. The figure I got of under 100,000 survivors of the Nazi Holocaust, it didn't come from me. It came from Raoul Hilberg. I think you'll agree if you have any knowledge of the Nazi Holocaust, which is doubtful, but if you have any knowledge of the Nazi Holocaust, you'll know that the world's leading authority in the Nazi Holocaust, bar none, was Raoul Hilberg. He was in a class all his own. Raoul Hilberg praised the Holocaust industry. In fact, he said my conclusions in the book were conservative. Now, Raoul Hilberg was begged by the U.S. Holocaust Museum and his close friend Elie Wiesel to remove his name from the book. And he said, no, I refuse to remove my name from the book because what Finkelstein wrote is true. He said Finkelstein's place in history as a historian is secure. And what was done to me was a travesty. So when you come along and say you're a hack writer, I attach as much value to that as I attach to the dust on this floor.
We have now seen incident after incident where entire families are vaporized in single strikes.
Who is in the families? Who lives in the house?
Family
inside?
members.
No,
family
or next
members.
to the house
Family
in which
members.
these families are
We
killed.
have seen incident after...
Do you know that Hamasniks weren't in that house? Do you know that their ammunition dumps weren't
Why
in
do I
those
have
houses?
to prove a negative?
You're saying that they deliberately targeted families.
you know,
If Israel wanted to kill civilians in Gaza, they could have killed 500,000 by now with the number of strikes they've done.
And therefore,
the fact that they've only killed a certain small number...
30,000 is a small number.
Small number in
You consider 30,000 a small number.
Proportion over 4 months probably is an indication that it's targeted and that there are Hamas targets in these places.
Okay. So I've given
12,000 children is only, and if that's the case, why is it? Yeah, you said only. Professor Morris, here's a question for you. If we take every combat zone in the world for the past 3 years, every combat zone in the world.
In Vietnam, the Americans killed
I said,
a million people.
Well, they could have killed 40 million.
I was in the anti-war movement. Don't strap me.
Killed a million people in Vietnam.
Fine, 30 million Russians were killed. So during World War II, so everything else is irrelevant. Here's a question, Professor Morris. Here's a question. It's very perplexing. If you take every combat zone in the world for the past 3 years and you multiply the number of children killed by 4, every combat zone in the world, you get Gaza. Okay? So when you
what
say
is that supposed to prove?
Okay, I'm going to tell you. Just shut up.
You're relying
and
on
I'll tell
Hamas
you,
numbers.
No, I'm not
Hamas
relying.
numbers are
I'm
not
relying on the numbers that everybody else. I'm relying on the numbers.
Even if we take the numbers, though, what does that prove?
Those are Hamas numbers.
Okay.
Which may not be true. They could invent anything because you know that they are a mendacious organization.
I know mendacious, believe me.
You like
mendacious as in the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So here's the thing. You say they could have killed 500,000, but they only killed That's your word.
They
only killed 30,000.
You believe that they deliberately target civilians. They would have killed many more. The fact is that they don't deliberately target civilians.
Professor Morris, for a historian, I don't want to understand Israeli society. You want to know the truth. I don't want to. I don't want to get inside their heads.
That's the problem.
90% of
a good historian tries to get into the heads of the various protagonists.
There's a limit. When 90% of Israelis think that Israel's using enough or too little force in Gaza, I don't want to get inside that head. 40% think that Israel's using insufficient force in Gaza. I don't want to get inside that head. I don't want to get inside the head of people who think they're using insufficient force against the population, half of which is children. I don't want to get inside that head.
Why is that illegal to blockade Gaza?
I'll tell you why.
You don't rocket your neighbor. You rocket your neighbor. Expect consequences.
I'll tell you why.
Expect consequences.
But that works both ways.
Yes. I know, not expect that.
Professor Morris,
both ways.
I'll tell you why. Because every human rights, humanitarian, and UN organization in the world has said that the blockade is a form of collective punishment, which is illegal under international law. You think a blockade...
You don't understand the way the world works.
Yeah,
These things are irrelevant.
And you think confining, because that's the blockade.
Yes, you don't...
Confining a million children...
That's the choice of Hamas.
Confining a million children in what the Economist called a human rubbish sheet.
The Economist supported Israel in this war and continues to support Israel.
What International Committee of the Red Cross called a sinking ship, what the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called a toxic slum. You think
it is a slum?
You think
but it's caused by
under
the
international law? You think it's legitimate?
Forget the law.
Hey, I know you want to forget the law. It's the one thing that it's what every Israeli fears the most.
What?
The law.
No.
Tzipi Livni said, I studied international law, I oppose international law. Of course you don't want to hear about the law.
It's got nothing to do with anything.
Okay, so here's the thing.
Yeah.
Then don't complain about October 7th. If you don't want to, if you want to say, forget about the law,
all I said was they acted like barbarians.
Then there is no international humanitarian law. There's no distinction between civilians and combatants.
There should be.
And so now you're doing what Moeen said. You're becoming very selective about the law. If you want to forget about the law, Hamas had every right to do what it did. It had every right to do what it did, according to you, not to me, because you want to forget the law.